Hello. All right. Sorry, I've got a cat in my hands right now, but then I'm gonna start. I'm gonna start doing some digital painting. Uh, so bear with me. This cat wants lots of attention, always when I'm trying to be productive. Come on, come on, kitty. Good girl. Blow the cat hair off my keyboard. All right. So yeah. I'm gonna do some digital painting. It'll be interesting. I don't do a lot of this, and not really typical for me to do it on stream, but let's have some fun. So this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to use this as my reference, and I'm going to try to paint this, and maybe add a little bit to it. We'll see. All right. Make sure my music is good. Right. Music is good. Let's dive in. All right, so I made sure to crop my image, to crop my canvas to be exactly the same dimensions as the photo. So this is a panoramic photo that I took on vacation. So I think the first step is probably going to be to find the horizon line. So the horizon line is like just a little bit above the middle. So actually, I'm gonna drop in. Just gonna drop in a neutral gray, 50% gray, just on the background here. Just it's easier to look at when it's not blinding white canvas behind you. You know, you can perceive the values better. So I'll do that for the background, even though it'll all get covered up eventually. And then I'll create a new layer, and I'm gonna use the square tool, the marquee tool, to sort of find the background sky. That way I can kind of layer that in. I think that's gonna be somewhere about there. And again, I can always make adjustments. The beauty of keeping things on layers is that I can always go back and tweak and make adjustments. And I'm gonna keep this. I'm gonna keep this grayscale. I'm gonna go with a grayscale drawing for now. I may choose to color it later, but I'm gonna focus on value first, and then adjust and add color later if I decide to. All right, so for the sky, it's going to be. Actually, I'm gonna go with a gradient for the sky for now. Use the gradient tool, and the gradient tool, of course, is under the paint bucket, or actually, the gradient and the paint bucket are together. So it usually defaults to gradient tool, and then the paint bucket's underneath it. But I generally use the paint bucket more often than I use the gradient. And then at the top of the toolbar, there's a bunch of different gradients. So these different selectors here select different types of gradients, and what I want is a radial gradient. And I want to edit this a bit, because right now, if I click up here to click on that, I can edit the gradient. I want it to go, first of all, I don't want it to add any color. I don't want any hue in there. So I'm going to change this, one. There we go, color. So I'm going to get rid of that. I do want it to be a little bit darker. Basically, I want it to go from bright to a little bit darker, because it is definitely a lot brighter where the sun is. So I want this to be a little bit towards the whiter side. And then how far that goes, I can adjust here. So I can adjust how fast the transition goes. And then the sun is basically somewhere like there. Let me just go further. That feels pretty good for now. Again, I can always come back to that later, but at least now I've kind of got a general idea that, okay, that is the sky, and that's kind of how the transition is for, that's where the light is. Cool, so let me go ahead and label my layers. Now, this is something that almost no artists do. Like, almost no artists bother to label their layers. And it drives me crazy, because it's so easy to forget which layers are which. I'm gonna go ahead and lock my transparency. One of the reasons that people don't use a lot of layers sometimes, they tend to like keep if they use layers at all, they tend to merge them down pretty often, is because they're always afraid of painting on the wrong layer, and that's a valid fear, because a lot of people do that. A lot of people paint on the wrong layer. Like, I do it all the time. But something that I've kind of discovered that helps to protect against that is turning on the lock transparency on that layer. That means that you can't paint on a different layer unless there's actually something there. Like, I could paint, if I go to the brush tool right now, if I try to paint down here right now, I'm on the sky layer. It's not letting me paint on the sky layer down here because there's transparency there. So it's saying, nope, not going to even do anything. So you start to try to paint, and you're like, wait, what's going on? There we go. You're like, wait, I'm trying to paint, but nothing's happening. And that then clues your brain in that, oh, wait, I'm on the wrong layer. And then you can switch layers and you're fine. But it saves you from painting on the wrong layer for like 20 minutes before you realize it and go, oh, crap. So, and I can always re-unlock it later if I need to tweak it, if I need to adjust the silhouette of this. But I'm going to end up having a hill in front of this anyway. This is the background, so I really am not likely to need to adjust this. Okay, so let's go ahead and put the water. Let's put the ocean down next. I'll even label it. That is the Atlantic Ocean. So let's see. Let me just block that in really roughly. And I'll just make a quick selection with the lasso. Looking at my reference, and that's good enough. And I can clean up the top part in a minute. And make some adjustments. But just to throw down some basic block-in shapes, I'm going to just paint bucket it. I'll paint bucket it. Let's see. Not too far off from what it is, actually. It's close to middle, but just a little bit darker, maybe. And then I can deselect, and then if I want to clean it up so that it's matching the horizon nicely, I can do that pretty easily with the square tool again, and just try to match, just line it up just right. It wasn't quite accurate there, but let's just move it down. There we go. Just hit the arrow key to nudge it 1 pixel down. There we go. All right, so if that's the water, then let's make the next layer the background hill. And I'm going to take a little bit of advice from Shadi Safadi in the sense that I'm going to paint very strongly on this one. So I'm going to get a nice big brush size. I do use Shadi Safadi's brushes. You can see them here. So all those brushes are here in this folder. I like that Photoshop puts them all into folders now. It makes things a lot easier. But So a lot of times when I'm doing landscapes, especially, I'll use Shadi Safadi's brushes, and the one I'm looking for. Where did it go? Is it this one? Yeah. So this one is the second brush, um, and this one has a pretty hard edge. It's a pretty hard brush, so I can block things in pretty quick, just to get a real rough composition. Okay, so make sure we're on the right layer. Let me just get this out here. Okay, so we're on layer 1, which needs to be, we'll call it fill. All right, and then we're just gonna get a pretty large brush and block this in. And I'm keeping an eye on the negative spaces. I'm trying to make sure that I'm matching negative space to what is there. And actually, so again, looking at the ocean actually needs to come further in. If I'm looking at my image, I'm looking at my reference, the ocean actually comes more than halfway across the canvas. So I'm going to go ahead and extend that. I'm going to go back to my ocean. And I hadn't locked the transparency on it yet, so I just hold the Alt key, sample the ocean value, and then I'll just paint a little bit further out and try to match mostly the perspective. Again, I'll probably need some cleanup, and there's also going to be layers on top of this that will be affecting it. But generally, I need this sort of water scenario here, and then the hill also. If I switch back to the hill overlaps the water about this much. So again, I'm just using a photo from my vacation, but ideally, we've been talking a lot about you can use Google Maps. You can use Google Maps to just browse the world, or actually Google Earth technically. So use Google Earth. You can just browse the planet and find really cool, first-person camera sort of scenarios where you can actually like go find an exotic location, and it's like you're standing there because you can rotate the camera and you can look around, like in VR if you want, or just just by rotating the screen. But the point is, you can choose your own camera angle and then use that as a reference. And I think that's a great idea, and I've kind of dabbled with that myself, and I think it's pretty fun. I got that idea, of course, from the virtual plein air group from Facebook, which I think is fantastic. So if you're gonna do that, you should check out that Facebook group, the virtual plein air Facebook group. I think it's really neat, and that's kind of where the inspiration came from to do this. And it's good practice. Okay. Now there's another layer of kind of mid-ground in front of this hill, so I'm not going to worry too much about the hill down here, because there's some mid-ground elements that are going to be covering that transition anyway. Mostly it's the top of the hill that I need to focus on for the moment. And then, of course, this transition where it meets the water, it kind of comes down, and I'll shrink my brush a little. And it doesn't have to be perfect at the moment. It doesn't have to be perfect ever, really. It just has to kind of hit the same kind of notes, the same kind of mood. Let me go ahead and switch my eraser brush. Switch my eraser brush to the same brush. Generally, when I'm brushing, when I'm doing silhouette kind of stuff, I want my brush and my eraser brush to be the same. Not always the truth, but I find it pretty useful to have my brush and my eraser to be the same texture and brush, so that I can basically paint in, paint out, and it's going to be the same kind of texture to the brush as I work. And I'm just kind of looking for some like interesting kind of modulation to this shape at the top of it, so that it doesn't feel too static. Where because again, this is where it breaks the sky. You know, breaks the horizon on the sky. So that's going to be kind of a focal point because our eyes are always naturally drawn to horizon lines and to areas where contrasting elements meet. Ah. Somehow moved it. Let's see. Let's go back to the eraser. And I'll just try to clean this up a little. Because where the hill meets the water here, it is a little bit more critical that that this meets it nicely. So I'll just go back and forth a little bit. And oh, what is it doing? Oh, don't even tell me it's that stupid Windows bug back. I fixed it. All right. Anyway. Okay. That's feeling pretty good, block-in wise, for the larger elements. Let's see. We've got now a major foreground element. Let me try to get that one put in now. That's the rock wall. Now the rock wall is also it's a pretty dark element. There is a highlighted side to it, but it's volcanic rock, so it's quite dark. I'm gonna go really dark with it for now, and I may adjust later. And that's gonna be pretty far to the edge here, but definitely diminishing into the into perspective there. This is the shadowed side of it. And it pretty much, you know, in perspective, visibly, it sort of goes almost all the way up to the hill here. And then of course there's those mid-ground elements behind it, but the perspective of it is like that. And then of course I need to also give a highlighted, you know, the top perspective issue or element. Could be a little bit brighter, I think, but again, that's you can always make adjustments later. And then there's also the fact that my reference, again, my reference is a panoramic, which generally causes some distortion around the sides anyway. So like this, the fact that this sort of flares out dramatically like this, that's partly just perspective issue where it tried to stitch, like when the photos were stitched together, there's some lens distortion that it didn't really compensate for quite right. So I may actually ignore some of this and have this just kind of continue off screen here instead of bending like this, because that's the reality. And so just get this back out of the way. All right, so there's also a little thing there, but I'm going to ignore that. So got so again, oops, let me sample this again. So again, mostly I've just got my two fingers. I've got brush and erase, brush and erase, brush and erase, brush and erase. Because right now I'm basically just silhouetting the major elements to get those blocked in. So this actually could be a little bit wider, I think. Or at least flare out to wider. Now there are some rocks there. Let me block in the pier. So sometimes you can't really nail. It's hard to really nail the exact dimensions and proportions of things until you get everything blocked in, because you don't have anything to compare it to. You can't, like, you need that perception. You need to be able to look at this compared to this. Is this the right size compared to this? Well, until you get everything blocked in, you can't can't really make those decisions because you're comparing it to nothing. You're just comparing it to what you think you see, and that's tricky. So I'm gonna call this the appear. I don't remember if that's actually appear. Dock appear. I don't think it's a dock because they don't usually pull boats up to that. Usually the boats go to the other one, but okay, let's see. And let's keep it on a fairly dark block in. This is going to be tricky. The perspective here has a lot to do with this edge, this angle. Getting that angle right is what kind of defines the perspective a lot. So, and I also need to, of course, nail the transition, or nail the distance between the top of or the top edge of this shape here with the horizon line, because again that tells perspective. I'm looking at the negative space in order to sort of match this. Again, it's a lot of it's all about the negative space. You know, okay, look at the distance between here, and you know, and like, okay, how far is it from the horizon? How far is it from, you know, the bottom of the canvas? It's all about like analyzing the negative spaces and then trying to match those in your image. And this, of course, this should be actually underneath the rock wall. So the pier should actually be underneath the rock wall because the rock wall is overlapping it in the foreground here. So I just shifted that layer to make sure the pier was underneath. And that way, and that also saves me the hassle of trying to, you know, make sure this edge over here is very clean, because this is going to obscure it anyway. So switching back to my eraser, just cleaning up some of this line work. Okay, and then there is also some rocks in the foreground. We'll overlap these. But I think I'll add those later. Those aren't crucial to the composition at the moment. Let's see. We need some mid-ground stuff. So we need another layer of this. Actually, this should be also behind the rock wall. Because the rock wall kind of bridges the gap. Compositionally speaking, this rock wall is kind of critical for this composition, because this rock wall here, it starts at the foreground and then goes into the background, or actually into the midground, not quite to the background, but it starts in the foreground and goes into the midground, which is a great compositional element because this draws your eye into the image, but it also overlaps the midground, so it's overlapping the foreground elements, and it's overlapping, it's obscuring some of the midground elements as well. So so that's kind of crucial. It's definitely on the top layer, in that sense. So in terms of the ordering of the layers. All right, so okay, putting in this layer. This is, let's see, going to be the this is going to be mid-ground. Now I could just label it mid-ground and put all the elements in the mid-ground into that scene, but I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. If I'm going to put the house on it, because there's a house there, like in the foreground, or the foreground of the middle ground, and so I'm not sure if I want to put that on its own layer, I think for now maybe I'll just keep the mid-ground layer and I'll just block in the whole shebang kind of all at once. So let me pick. Well, the house is actually quite bright, so it's basically close to white. So let me just start roughing in the placement of the house. And then it's also on a hill, it's on a slope. There's also the orange roofs, which is quite common in Portugal, where this was taken. So again, a lot of times it's not necessarily about painting in with the brush. A lot of times it's paint in with the brush, switch to the eraser and clean it up, paint in with the brush, switch to the eraser, and just going back and forth to massage the shapes into the shapes they need to be. That's really what gets it done. Is you can't just count on one thing to be the answer. I think a lot of people overthink what artists actually do, in the sense that they think artists just make the perfect brush stroke on the first stroke, and that's not really accurate. Even the line artist type people, the comic book artists, line artist type people, generally they don't make or make the perfect stroke on the first stroke. They just undo constantly. They make a stroke, undo, make a stroke, undo, make a stroke, undo. I've definitely watched some of those people work, and I've done that myself sometimes, but it's very similar to what we're doing here, which is just brush and then erase, brush and erase, brush and erase. It achieves very similar results, so depends on what you're trying to get. Oh, hey, somebody just subscribed. Thanks for subscribing. Oh, I think that might be YouTube. Yeah. Thanks for subscribing on YouTube if you're watching live. I haven't really been streaming to YouTube much lately. I've been streaming mostly to Twitch and then just copying stuff to YouTube. But either way, thanks for your subscription. All right. So I'm trying to decide if I want to block the whole thing. I think I do. I think I will. I'll just block the whole thing white and then paint over where the transitions are to the other colors. Because the essence of this, like the majority of it, is it's a white house. It does happen to have an orange roof, but that's, I think, part of the detail that gets added later. And now again, I'm looking at negative space. I'm looking at negative space. Looking at negative space here between the top of the roof here and the top of the roof here, which creates this angle. And then I've got these angles. So I'm just trying to analyze this by using the negative space as my guides, my anchors to sort of let me know where things should be. And then I also need to nail this angle because there's this angle here. There's actually a wall there, not so much a house itself, but the wall in front of it. But I'm gonna block it in with this white anyways, just so I can get the angle down and figure it out. Okay, then there's another house in the background there. We'll come back to that. There's some more for mid-ground elements over here. There's a truck. There's some cornfields. So, I think I will break this into pieces. The more you break it into pieces, the easier it is to tweak later if you need to. So I'm gonna add another layer. Have a double click, it gives me this. So I'm gonna add another layer, and I call this like, you know what? I know what I'll do. Corn. I could also start getting organized and put these into layered groups as well. Why not? Let's do some layer grouping. Let's learn some cool organizational skills. So okay, we got mid ground. Oh, the thing is the rock wall. The rock wall will transition between all those, so might have to leave that separate. But so mid ground house, mid ground corn. I'll just group those two. Mid. The mid ground elements are going to go here. Here. Let's see the ocean. This is the sky and hill. Definitely are in the background. The ocean goes in front of those. Okay. So background, we got background elements, ocean, let's see, midground, rock wall. Rock wall is definitely going to be foreground, even though it does transition over. So let's just do foreground. All right. Stretch this out. Foreground, background, midground. All right. Let's go back to midground. So I had added the midground corn. Let's rough some of that in. All right, and that is pretty close to the horizon, actually. And I'm going to just kind of rough this in with, let's see, some kind of the water mid-tone bit value. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna kind of make a squiggly reference. Yeah. Now this is the darker green part of it, and the tops of it have the lighter yellow. So I'll do is I'll block this in, and then I will just lighten it slightly to give that yellow break in the value there. But I'll shrink my brush down. It's a pretty thin layer there. And this is just, again, a lot of this is just placeholder. It's just placeholder block-ins to like so that I can paint over it later with more detail. But I'm just, you got to nail the composition first. You got to rough in the composition before you can worry about making this any prettier. Just scoot over a bit. Okay, so let's add another layer. Let's call it truck. Actually, I can, now that I've labeled this whole folder midground, I could just delete the word midground. I know it's like kind of OCD, but like there's no need to be redundant. If I've got a folder called midground, I don't have to have midground corn. So I know that's kind of ridiculous, but yeah, whatevs. Sometimes being super anal is the best way to make good art. Okay, now the truck here. Let's just go. I'm gonna put the tires down first, real quick. Now it actually goes off the composition. And I don't know. I may leave it. I may match my reference, or I might actually try to scoot the truck over a bit so I don't have it cut off at the edge of the image there. I'm not really sure what I want to do with that yet, but just kind of decide where the wheels are, and I could just kind of sketch this out a little. Comes up. So only problem is if I want to put the front of the truck in, I'll have to get some other references, but not that that's that big of a deal. And then this is it has one of those truck beds that are kind of like hacked on or whatever. But this is actually getting too close to the house. So again, the beauty of Photoshop, I think our proportions are off, and some things they aren't quite lining up right. So beauty of Photoshop, Control T, and then just shrink it down, and try to get it placed a little bit better. And actually, I'm gonna go switch to the house real quick because I might as well block in the garage spot, because the garage dimensions will help me to understand the truck dimensions. Because obviously the truck would have to fit in the garage. Although I'm pretty sure they don't actually fit it in the garage. I'm pretty sure that garage is actually full of winemaking equipment, because I have actually seen the inside of it. Oops, all right. Cool. And let's see, let's just put a window right here. All of which, of course, I'll keep tweaking and editing, but when you start to block things in, it starts to make it kind of feel more like, oh, I see where this is going. Again, the line art part of it, I'll probably get rid of. These are kind of just guides. All right. Let's um, let's get something like this and imply that this is the red roof. It's a bit of the red roof redness, like red brick. About here. Actually, I need to. This. Do need to add that wall too. I don't want to get too carried away with detail there, though. I'm getting a little too caught up in detail at the moment, and that's not what I'm ready for. All right, let's see. Let's add another layer and try to break up this water line a bit, and keep it from being quite so rough. Actually, there's a pavement too. There's a pavement layer I should put in as well. Let's do that. Let's do that first. So the pavement's going to be a little bit lighter in color, tonal value, but it is in shadow. The whole scene is in shadow, really, because the sun is going down. But so let's just match this, but try to break it up a little bit. And that should be, yeah, okay, good. It's under the wall. Okay, so let's actually put a little texture onto the brush. Let's try playing with that. Let's see what this one does. Let's see. It kind of works. I mean, we're not really ready for that kind of detail yet, but it just kind of helps visually to break this up a little, so we can see. Oh, this is pavement. Okay, it just kind of helps make that easier to read. So as we're planning, it makes the planning easier. And there's a lighter strip of it there. So now the truck and the truck and some other visual elements are kind of blocking the corn right there, and they're on top of the pavement. So I won't go too far up with that. But I will break this up with some more color values though, or tonal values rather, just so the pavement itself is kind of broken up like that. Try some different sizes to the brush. And I'm just gonna color sample now and go back and forth and try to just kind of fudge this up a bit so that it gives it a pavementy feel. And then the pavement changes texture a little bit where it hits the pier. Try to incorporate that in a minute. So there's going to be a little bit lighter pavement. Here. And there's also just a bit of a shadow area right in front of the wall, but there's a lighter strip this side. So let me darken a lot of this. So a lighter splosh. Okay, let's see. Yeah, I was saying earlier I wanted to break up that water line. I just didn't get a chance to do it yet. Actually, this pavement should go. It's on top of the water a little bit. Okay, cool. So this actually extends a little bit out here. Because there's actually a ramp. There's the pier itself, and then there's a ramp that goes. It's mostly covered in water, unless the tide is out. But so there's going to be water overlapping the ramp right there. All right, but let's go back to what I said earlier. I want to break up that water line. So let's add some texture along here and kind of play around with that. And there's also a wall there. All right, so let's go with. Make sure I have the brush tool on. And this is going to be a tricky one because I'm going to need to go a little darker, but there's also highlights on all these little rocks. What I'm talking about is these rocks right here. There's pretty good sized rocks there. It's not like they're pebbles, but each one has its own little highlight and shadow. So I'm not gonna really get that deep into it yet. I'm gonna go back to my other brush, but I'm just gonna sort of imply some of those a little bit for now, and then I'll kind of actually, let's see. Maybe not quite so dark with it. I want to basically break up this water line. And there's going to be some frothy water there too, so I'll have to go back into that and adjust that. But and then there's definitely some bigger rocks out here into the water, which breaks up the coastline here, and breaks up the hill, which is what I was counting on to sort of clean up this line anyway. If we get far enough in, there starts to be little houses in the distance, but we'll get back to that. And these, and these are volcanic rocks, so they're quite dark, but still needs highlights on them. But for now, I just need to make sure I find out where they are. What's the composition of them? And of course, there's the wall that comes out here. And then this is going to be a pretty sharp line. This is going to help to delineate this, where there is actually a sharp line here where the pavement ramp is going to clip across the water line. In fact, make my life a lot easier if I just do that. So let me make sure that the pavement is on top of the water line. That way, if the water line is just here, so actually what I want to do is clarify this. Waterline background, because I will have a foreground waterline as well on the other side of the pier. So I'll just clarify that for myself. But now that this is under, I should be able to paint this pavement and make sure that the pavement itself is clipping across those rocks. And what that'll do is allow me to it'll allow me to just paint those rocks behind them pretty fast and loose, and not really have to worry about the having the rocks overlap or occlude the pavement, which would be backwards. Let me just. So I'm just gonna throw down a layer here, just so that there's no transparency that's going to cause any problems there. And I can actually blast this in pretty fast because, and I'll retexture it later, but just want to make sure that this ramp doesn't get occluded by the rocks that are behind them. That would not make sense. And then up here, it just becomes not an issue anyway, but okay, let's see. Let's go back to that texture brush. Which was it? This one? Yeah, okay. So just actually let me actually do this. Let me lock the transparency for a minute on this layer. That way I can brush pretty confidently without having to worry about, again, clipping across to the other surface there. Come back. Actually, I'm going to do that. Okay, so. Okay, let me go with, let's go with putting in that wall. The background wall. Let's call it, and that's going to be in the background. Actually, the waterline background needs to be in the background as well. In the water? The ocean should be in the back. Oh. Well, actually, technically, the water is going to overlap those rocks, so that actually is accurate. So what I need to do is go into my ocean and sort of cut into it. I'll use my eraser and just kind of chip away at the ocean line, because that will overlap those rocks anyway. And I'm going to have to paint that transition with the water anyway. So, oops. Nope, not that brush. This brush. Horizon line back in there. All right. Yeah, so that the rock. It's gonna be tricky. I think maybe I'll break this up. Maybe I'll break this up to where maybe these rocks lay on top of the water, but then these are underneath. Tricky, trying to decide how to arrange the layers. So this is going to be the wall though. Let me start with the wall. call it seawall. And let's try to rough that in. Brush. All right. That's gonna kind of actually. This is gonna sort of curve along this way. Need a little bit more space though. It's getting a little too cramped to the house. Actually, I think this whole thing. Yeah, this whole thing needs to scoot over. So, okay, so these rocks, the water line, I can move those a little this way. And the water itself, the ocean, I need to chop back this way a little. The rocks themselves don't come quite out this far. Rocks, actually a pretty tiny little strip. I think I will cut those into two separate things, I think. So if I just take the lasso and just do that and just Control X, Control V, now it's on its own layer. Although the layer got moved. There, okay, got moved. Okay. So anyways, but now that's on its own layer. Let's see. I'll just do that for now. Couldn't think of another another random creative name for that, so rocks it is. All right, so let me go back to my seawall, and the seawall, of course, also needs to move over. Looking at the negative space between the seawall and the house, definitely needs a bit more spacing there, and that feels a lot better. So sample that again and just start painting that. And that's going to come right to the edge of the ramp. So the ramp is, of course, going into the water. This is just a curvy little road. And it goes off into the distance up there. And then it hits. There's another wall there. But let's in here. And then there's, of course, more, there's a pattern to it, but for now I'm just going to imply shadow, because there's definitely a different color, a tonal value to the top of the wall as to the sides. It is a rock wall, but again, it's not really the time for texturing yet, or patterns. Even though I sort of textured the pavement a little bit, but Mostly I just want to show where the side of the wall is versus the top. There is a difference in texture and in tonal value. This, this has some depth here as well. All right, and then of course, actually the front of this needs to have some depth as well. So this line should actually come like this more. And then there is transition there where this actually looks like that. And I should change that a little bit. Just to be just a hair lighter. It's just a hair darker. This angles outwards a bit. Now, getting these angles just right is going to be tricky. Like trying to, I've already kind of messed up the angle a little bit. So here's something I like to do, just to make life easier, especially assuming I'm going to paint over anyway to retexture it. Sometimes a quicker answer is just using the liquify. If you're not quite getting the angle or shape you need, sometimes just going straight to the liquify filter can kind of help speed things up a bit. Just get, shrink the brush a bit and just kind of nudge it. Okay, so this is a much flatter. This should be much like flatter here. Kind of more like that. So. And that kind of gets me in the ballpark a lot faster than trying to paint and repaint, and then if I hit OK, and then I can hit Control Z to check out my changes and really kind of see, did that give me what I need? It's closer. Closer, but not quite there. Part of it's this whole thing needs to be way thinner too. Go to the eraser, and because when it gets way off into the distance, it gets the white line on top gets super thin. Clean this up a bit as well. I'm gonna get a lot flatter. This just comes in pretty flat this way, and then this actually gets occluded anyways by another wall over here. So I don't have to get too crazy with that. let's just go just about with this. Let's leave this alone for a minute and come back to it. Okay. Actually, I say that, but then I'm like, wait, hold on. This gets a little bit bigger. And then this. Let's call that good enough for now, and then we'll come back to it later. Let's block in some more walls. So walls. There's walls right here in front of the house. I'm gonna find the house. I'm gonna select the house layer and then just make a new layer on top of it. House wall. And I'm just gonna start roughing that in. So that's gonna be definitely darker than the house. Probably even darker than this, but let me just start with this tone value for now, just to differentiate it from the house. That comes most of the way up to this balcony. And it also turns the corner a little bit right here. There's, I believe that's still wall. Maybe I may have to zoom in later and double check, but something turns the corner there, and there's also a telephone pole right there, like right by the corner. So we'll come back to that. But just getting the approximate placement and dimensions of the wall. And then there's also an old ruined adega, and the adegas are where they make the wine. There's an old kind of broken down adega right there. Let's see if I can actually, yeah, we can zoom in a little bit. So yeah, it's like kind of an old broken down adega. That's there. So there's the shower, of course. The shower for when you go swimming in the ocean. Cool. Let's just keep that up right here. Okay. Let's see. Rock wall is over here, and then this. Actually, this on the house doesn't come quite so far. This comes up somewhere there. Too much. This comes up this way. A bunch of that. I don't know why I do that sometimes. Holes, there's gaps here where the broken down adega is, but let's darken this a bit. modify some of those broken down entryways. Am I using shape dynamics? Yeah, I'm using shape. And then the house, there's actually another house in the background that put the orange roof on. So the shingles. That actually comes all the way down, breaks the line of the other foreground house. All right, let's see. Making some progress. Takes a while. Takes a while. Yeah, that's why digital painting is fun, but it's hard to make money doing it these days because it takes so long. All right, let's see. Getting a lot of layers going too. What's next? Let's see, there's another wall here. This actually needs to come up farther. All right, let's see, seawall. So it needs to come up. Here. It's back of it. There's going to be another wall right there. Brush. And this is a mostly white wall. It's just the littlest gap. Oh, but actually before I do that, I need to create a new layer. Just call it wall. This is going to roughly this, but I'm running into a problem. I don't have enough space. I think what I need to do is scoot a bunch of layers again. Zoom out and double check the overall composition again. Yeah. I think some of these things just need to be smaller in general. Yeah. I think maybe I need to scale down some of these elements. All right, so let's do that. Let's eh, I think I'll leave it. I think I'll leave it, and then I'll just make adjustments. Because it kind of makes this house feel a little bit more important, having it a little bit larger. Let's see the truck for a minute. Where's the truck? Truck. Let me just blast in some white on there because it's the color. And kind of a mid-tone. A little darker than mid-tone, actually. This is, blasted in. Okay, jumping back. Let's jump to the foreground. Starting to get into that mood where I want to jump around and not stare at the same part of it too much. So here, oh, I want something above. I want a layer that's above the pier. I guess I go above both. All right, let's get some rocks blasted in here. Let's go with kind of dark, but not as dark as the itself. Should go. Actually, what I'm gonna do, sort of get this to kind of come along together faster, is I'm gonna switch to transfer. I'm gonna turn on the transfer and set it to pen pressure. Actually. Sorry, my kitty. All right. There we go. So that's going to make it easier to add highlights and kind of break up the surface of these rocks a little bit easier. So I can add some texture and some highlights to these rocks, or that should be. So it makes it easier, and I can sample back and forth to go back and forth between shadow and highlight, and shadow and highlight. To add a little bit more natural transitions surfaces. Ultimately, this whole surface is going to need to be broken up completely with rocks and there's actually no sand right there at all, so it's just all a rock kind of beach. So I'm just going to add as much of that texture in here as I can. Have fun with it. We should probably give it actually. I'm just jumping all over the place, I know, but I should probably go back to my pier for a second because where's my pier? I could use a little bit of texture and could use a little bit of lighting, at the very least lighting, because it just kind of looks like a blob at the moment. So break up the surface of that. Light is definitely hitting on the top a little bit more so than the side, of course. And it also gets a little bit lighter in color up here as well. I locked transparency on this, didn't I? Yeah, lock transparency. There we go. That'll make it easier. Just kind of paint a little more freely. Discoloration on the sides as well. Texture, but it's also generally darker. So. Probably want to get a little bit sharper line on parts of that. So let's get a little bit of delineation there. All right. And let's do the same up here too. Just kind of start texturing things a bit. I still have a lot of background elements to paint, but I think I'm going to come back to those because I feel like texturing. Sometimes it's definitely good to block everything in first, but sometimes I'm just like, I just want to move on to texturing and shading for me. I really like texturing and shading. That's I think a lot of people do. I think it's very soothing, and I was on the wrong layer. So rock wall. Okay. Let's just start breaking this up a little bit. Turn on lock transparency. So I can paint a little more freely. There's actually a transition here in the reference that has like a little bit of splotches of this sort of lighter color, and then it sort of transitions into the darker. The darker still has a little bit of texture to it, but it's more. Switch to one of the other sampled brushes. Yeah, it's a little more like this. I'm not sure how much I like that though, actually. This feels a little bit better. I just keep it kind of subtle. Actually. It's a little good. Oh. Hey, yeah, yeah, kind of. Just a little digital painting exercise. Not actually making it as concept art for a specific thing or anything. Just kind of practice for me, and also to help my students sort of learn. Uh, Not that I'm by any means a master of digital painting, but but yeah. So nothing specific. Just kind of uh, more for practice. I don't tend to do a lot of concept art professionally. I'm more of a 3D guy normally. Sorry, I don't know how long ago I said that. I haven't really been paying attention to the chat quite as much lately, so not sure if you're still here. Oh, cool. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I'm having fun with it. I'll show you the reference just so you can see what I'm pulling from if you're curious. This is what I'm painting. So just kind of bouncing around, trying to block it in and add a little bit of texture and lighting, and going with grayscale for now, and then I'll try to add color later. But yeah, it's kind of soothing, you know. I do like digital painting. I don't do it as often as I should, or as often as I would like, but um, you know, got some music on, just kind of zoning out and getting into the details. Are you an artist as well? Spontaneous doodler. That's how artists get started. You know, spontaneous doodling is a fun thing to do, and it doesn't really take a whole lot more from spontaneous doodling to full blown artist. If you just get in that zone and just keep pushing and if you spontaneous doodle often enough, you'll get better, and you'll definitely qualify as an artist. Let's go. It's gonna be solid. How many hours? Let's see. How long has this stream been live? The stream has been live for 2 hours and 40 minutes. So 2 hours and 40 minutes. Yeah. It You can definitely go back all the way to when there was literally nothing on the canvas. Um, so I bounced around a bit. Like I definitely don't always practice what I preach. Like I always preach, definitely you should block in everything first before you start texturing or detailing. But sometimes, sometimes I just get so tired of blocking things in that I just like okay, I kind of want to dive in and do some detailing. And sometimes I regret it, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's fine. Make sure it's on the right layer. Luck, very talented. Thanks, I appreciate that. Enjoy your stream hopping. Hope you find some fun stuff to watch, and have a good day. Oh crap! And of course I did that on the pavement layer. Okay, all right, can handle this. Quick fix. Lasso. Control X. Control V. And it's on its own layer now. Good to go. All right. That should be in the background houses layer. Alright, the reason I was doing that is because. You know what? Let's split this up too. Pavement. Take this. Background pavement. Split that up, make that a little easier to work with. Transfer. A wall there. What layer is that? Oh man, it's on the ocean layer? Okay. Hmm. Let's fix it. Let's just paint over it and repaint it. Simpler. Okay. Oh man. Battery's getting low on my speakers. That's it. Alright, so that means it's going to be time to stop soon. Because I should recharge my batteries, both literally and figuratively. Since I've been at this for 3 hours and 45 minutes. Ugh. Turning my brain to mush, which is kind of fun. Let me go back to this for a second. This one. Running out of music. Batteries are dying. Yeah, it does. These trees are actually bigger. These lines need to adjust. That feels better. Definitely. I'll just finish out the hour, I guess. We'll go till. Go till 4 hours. I guess. Nah, I'll just go 2 more minutes. Let's go to 3 hours and 50 minutes. Because I'm getting pretty tired. I need to eat. I haven't eaten. actually. Scoot it over. And let's go. Still need to adjust this more. To chink. Move that. It's better. This push here. So much. So actually, that's not quite right. That's way off. Okay, somebody finally joined me. Sorry, I was just about to sign off. This is what I'm working on. You can watch the VOD if you're curious, but I'll show you what I'm working on real quick. This is in Portugal. That is that's my reference. Okay, so I'm gonna sign off for now. I may come back to this next time. May come back to this next time, or I may do a demo of a different method. Because this one, I'm just using a photo reference. Again, I had talked about, you can use photo references. You can use use Google, like Google Earth, to fly around the world and find photo references in photo 360 spheres, and then pick an angle and try to paint it. That's a great challenge to do. There's also using 3D to cheat, to basically block in your perspective using 3D, and then just kind of use that as your template to paint over. So that's another great cheat for doing concept art. Let's see what else. There was one other thing. Oh, and then just, of course, you could just follow a tutorial and paint from a tutorial. That's fine too. Whatever, just get some digital painting practice. Play around with some brushes, tweak the brushes. Mess around with them, and definitely use layers. Again, I prefer if you use lots of layers, and if you keep them organized and you label them, that's preferable. You'll find it makes your life a lot easier too. You don't label your layers and you have lots of them, it gets really confusing when you try to figure out which layer each thing is on. So that's it for me for now. Probably for today. I'll try to come back to this when I get a chance and keep on adding in some detail. So anyways, fun stuff. See you around.